try and do is to sort of look through the lens of both the CEO that have struggled, and we've heard about the sort of department store situation particularly. And I think a lot of that failure, candidly, was to do with quality of execution. That they did incredibly well in the early days, and then through the 70s and 80s, it was a disaster, and then there was a whole new management team and the resurrection of department stores. So we mustn't forget that it's not just about strategy, it's actually also about the quality of execution. And one of the reasons why I think the high street's having such a problem is there ain't a lot of innovation going on in the high street for all sorts of reasons. So that's the way I'm going to try and now find the clicker to move the slides. Multi-channel, the new battleground. I'm not saying the store channel is the battle's over, but I think we've moved on. And again, as I said, I want to look at this from two perspectives, the strategic issues and also some strategic responses, and with some bias. I try and break this down into sort of the what's and the how's to try and, because I am just a simple shopkeeper starting my career with what I think was one of the best retailers in the 60s. Some of you don't even go back that far, with Marks and Sparks, who were in their heyday and did incredibly well with what they did, but lost sight of what they were about. And I think if you look at this for a moment and say to yourself, what are the key things that matter? Every CEO is wondering about, where's my next source of top line growth? And the other bottom one there is which innovations are important to me. And then on the other side, the how's, how do I run a cost-effective business and avoid complexity, because we're entering that era of massive complexity. And then how do I build long-standing relationships with customers, across the brand? And that's absolutely the key one. So those are the sort of what's and the how's that one wants to focus on, if you like. No need to say too much here, other than just look under the sophistication side of things. There's more data out there now than you can shake a stick at. Massive amount of data, and no one is really using that data properly. In fact, we're all flooded with it, and there are data warehouses with it coming out of your ears, and people don't know how to really farm it and then utilize it properly to enable management to make better decisions. So I think we're entering the era, an exciting era, where customer information and insights is really going to drive better decision making. And then the other sort of final point on there is localized assortment. And that becomes, I think, even more critical. And this is how I think stores, because I don't see the death of stores. I see the death of stores that deserve to fail. Woolworths isn't around because, frankly, it didn't have a point of difference. Kmart is struggling. Sears are all struggling. These businesses are struggling because they lost what they stood for. They didn't have clarity. And yet, Apple are still opening stores and doing amazingly well. Why? Because they've got clarity about what they're doing, and they create an enormously wonderful experience, and they look at everything through the lens of the consumer. In my previous role, which I retired from a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of meeting with Jobs 4 times a year, because we were their biggest supplier in the US, globally actually. And one of the things that guy taught me, and it was only 4 conversations a year, when everybody else zigged, I zagged. When everybody else is laying off people, I'm recruiting them. And I remember in the sort of 80s, 70s, 80s, when America started having a real tough time, he was out there recruiting graduates who were the people that actually developed the product that they're so famous for today. So the last thing he did was to follow the pack. In fact, his view was, if the pack's going that way, go the opposite way. And that's exactly the way one has to think about the whole technology world. Because, as Peter's rightly said, too many people still think about things through the old lens, and just abandon it, absorb it, and actually go with it, because there's a huge opportunity. And stores can certainly outperform what the web does in many ways, because people still want to touch stuff and they want it to walk out working. I mean, people produce stuff today, cameras, and I know from the research we used to do, less than 40% of the capability of a camera gets used. Less than 60% of the capability of a PC gets used. And why? Because there's just too much in the stuff that the customer doesn't want, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So, enormous era around using data and really looking at things through the lens of the consumer. But we're in a very, very sophisticated and complex world. That's the the sort of message here. Very simple terms. I look at things in multiple dimensions. You know, we had retailers chasing, you know, sort of extension of products along the horizontal. Many retailers going up multiple channels, online call centers, etc., and then going geographically. I think we're in the era now where all of those things are important, but actually people are moving much more to think about services and not just the experience in the store. And very successful brands want to, you know, work with you 24 hours a day. So it's a seamless experience. And the successful retailers will get there before others will. And I think that's where Apple, who are basically a manufacturing group, have taught retailers how to retail. I mean, their store environments are entirely set out to satisfy consumers. And yet retailers are still, you know, laying things out the way they always laid out. You know, we ask you to come in and spend a fortune, then we ask you to queue at the checkout. Where is RFID? Now, I know multiple people, and I used to mess with it as well. And the first retailer that gets to a store that's fully RFID, so you transact in the store, you walk out, and it's done. That retailer will win in the consumer's mind because they'll have sorted things out on behalf of the consumer. And it will happen. It will happen. No question about it in my mind. So that's where I think the good retailers are going, towards thinking more about services. If you go back, and some of you aren't old enough, I know, but there's still some old farts in the room like me, but if you go back to the sort of 50s and 60s, we were in the sort of era of mass marketing. Then we moved subsequently about a decade later to targeted marketing. Then we moved to sort of personalized marketing, you know, the sort of era of Dunnhumby, etc., about a decade ago. In the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've moved to what I call co-creation, where consumers who really trust brands want those brands to help them solve their problems. Consumers are very smart people. They're very savvy. They've got an idea about what they want, but they don't altogether have all the answers. And if they trust you as a brand, they'll work with you to co-create their product. And you're seeing this in the fashion footwear industry, the fashion industry. You're certainly seeing it in the car industry, and you're starting to see it in the technology industry. So we're in that era. And I think the balance of power now has moved from the manufacturers to the retailers, and from the retailers now back to the consumer, where it used to be in the 50s, you know, when the horse and cart came around and delivered the bread and the milk, and those guys knew their individual customers. We're moving back to that era where the customer has the power, which is absolutely the right thing. And where retailers now really have to know their customers as individuals, not just as groups of people, because we're all individuals and we all do things differently with different things. So I think we're in that era, and I think, again, a lot of retailers are starting to take advantage of it. We've heard all sorts of stuff around the importance of the web. There are some categories, we talk about 50%, but there are some categories where the sales online are 70 and 80%, and growing even faster. I mean, commodities are up there now, without any question. But at the end of the day, that's always been, it's been a bit of a catalogue. The store's still very important, and those retailers that actually think holistically will be the winners. But they're not the ones that structure in the old way of here's the channel guy, here's the online guy. It's looking through the lens of the consumer. And good retailers are actually lining up now with customer segments being their key. Not channels, really looking at the way that customer segments behave, or individual groups of customers. And then how do we source for them, how do we procure for them, how do we help them? Seamless across all channels. And that's the way I think the industry is going. And those retailers that get there first will be the winners, there's no question. And there will be, retailers here to stay, the store channel is here to stay, but only if it deserves to. If people don't deserve, they don't do a good job from a quality execution perspective, they ain't going to be around. So there's a huge opportunity here if people embrace it. Technology is here to embrace, no question about it in my mind. And these numbers are real, they're a little bit dated now, but the key message here is that those customers that shop across all of your business are 80 to 90% more profitable than those that don't, and more importantly, they come back consistently. There are some people that still shop in one channel, and the object of the exercise from my perspective is for those people that don't shop online, is for retailers to help them shop online and use it as a catalogue, not as a threat. use it as a way of communicating with them, not as a threat. If they do, they're going to die, in the same way that many people have gone. One of the key elements of success here, though, is the importance of people. You know, in this new world, you can't run everything centrally. You've got to embrace your employee group, and they have to be as much empowered to help deliver this experience, probably more so than at any point. You can't just rely upon standard operating procedure or SOP. One has to create an environment where the individuals that work for you feel as much empowered about the brand and as passionate about the brand as you do. And as a result of that, really make a difference with the customer experience. And this is often missed. Change management is a real issue. You know, we're hearing a lot about it with the health industry. You start to talk to doctors about the way in which things work, and they know that there has to be change, but everybody's frightened of change instead of embracing it. And the same thing with technology. You know, technology can help in so many different ways, but the key issue is we have to make sure that people feel empowered to make a difference. And those retailers that do this, again, will win. But this is an important ingredient. No point just having an online business if you don't structure your business differently, don't structure your management differently, and your incentives differently. And again, I think this is something that's really missed from my perspective. Coming to the penultimate here. The connected world, as I like to call it, is here to stay. You know, and if you think about the convergence of the three screens, you know, the TV, the PC, and now the phone, those things are converging, and yet they're converging quicker in people's homes than they are in the retail industry. You know, if you think about the Apple products now, you think about with anybody's technology products. You know, the PC talks to the TV talks to the phone, etc., etc. And if you look at someone's home, I mean, we're almost at the connected world. The hard pipe has gone. We're now doing things, through the web, etc., Wi-Fi. But retailers are not structured this way. You know, we're still building things in the old way. So the convergence of the three screens is really what's happening. And I think the handheld terminal, the mobile phone, whatever we end up calling it, is really where the power is going to be. But there's nothing new. I mean, people have been playing with this technology for 20 years. You know, in Palo Alto in the mid-80s, 90s, we created a handheld terminal that could read barcode labels at 5 miles. It could read your credit card stuff at 2 miles. But the technology was too expensive in those days, and people were worried about it. But guess what? Now it's here, and it's moving very fast. And my advice to everybody is embrace it. And see how you can use it to optimize your store experience, not be fearful of it. And this is where, from my experience, certainly in the US, we were very powerful with PCs and TVs. And the reason I bought Charles Dunson's business, 50% of his business, was he was the power as far as mobile phones are concerned. And we put those talents together, took them back to the US, and we grew our mobile phone business exponentially because they had that expertise. And that's where one has got to look for partnerships, which coming on to my final point, if you like. The supply chain, is still run, generally speaking. I mean, I should say at the start that the UK and Europe particularly, but the UK probably has one of the most efficient retail supply chains in the world. Primarily because it costs nearly 38% more to run a store in the UK and Europe than it does in the US. And it's becoming even more so now with the cost of fuel. So as a result, there's been a tremendous amount of work over the last 15 years around supply chains, and supply chains here are pretty good, but guess what? They're not lined up with real, pure multi-channel. People are still looking at the pipe this way. Instead of looking at consolidating from Asia in the consolidation centers and then shipping straight to consumers' homes, we're still going into DCs, into stores, and out again. We've got to start thinking much more differently. Market level logistics will come along with the way the fuel prices are rising and force us to think differently. But I think the UK is in great shape. The industry here, the carrier industry is in great shape. And this is where I think partnerships are really critical. Core competencies, focusing on core competencies is what retailers should do. And this is where you have to look at smart people who've got a capability, partner with them, and trust them. The sort of PayPals of this world. And, dare I say it, MetaPack. We have a great capability that sits there, that really provides you, and we're now starting to look at it through the lens of the customer and try and say to ourselves, how do we make sure that our client CEOs, that we're putting ourselves in their minds about how do they really build a real sticky relationship with their customers, and what can we do to make sure that we're helping them get there quicker. And that's where I think partnering is really what's it all about. Many industries have moved there much quicker than retail. Retail has been very slow to partner. It's tried to control things 100%. Well, those days are over. And this is why I think looking at partnerships is really important, and embracing the fact that you need to concentrate on core competencies and work with other people that have a different core competency, but a synergistic set of values and core competencies to your good selves. So, in conclusion, the other key element is around innovation. This piece of research, going back to the last problem recession we had, depression, I think it was technically. Those companies, and this was a piece of work carried out by two particular consulting firms, looked at companies that constantly innovated during that period of recession versus those that didn't. And those that consistently innovated, factual, hard innovation, produced considerably better results than those that didn't. So, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and they don't sort of, you can't cut your way out of a problem, you've got to grow your way out of a problem and think differently. And unfortunately, in too many instances, working with people around the world, you find that isn't the case. And this is where, I'm pleased to say that the leadership team inside of MetaPack is constantly innovating to find different and smarter ways. And I know there are lots of other people who are doing the same thing. And finally, very finally, I promise you, for me, if one doesn't put the customer at the center of everything you do, you're missing a trick. For me, it's about looking through the lens. Is what we're doing in the best interest of the customer? Is it really changing the customer experience? If it isn't, you shouldn't do it. So everything has to start and end with the consumer, in my opinion. We then need to create an environment where the workforce, the employee group, are really empowered to make a difference. And sadly, a lot of retailers get it right. I mean, John Lewis is an excellent example of empowerment, an excellent example. But I'm afraid there are too many others that still treat employees as numbers. And those that are really successful, yes, SOP is important, but actually having people think and go that extra mile for every customer transaction is what builds the business tomorrow. And then, again, finally, every solution needs to be looked at holistically. I think you heard Peter talk about building things in silos. One has to look at the pipe, the supply chain holistically, the customer experience holistically, and not sort of have demarcations that incentivize people in their respective bits, as opposed to looking at the total experience. And at that point, I will conclude.
Peter, thank you very much.